Absolutely, positively.
Back in July of 2020, Democratic nominee, now President Joe Biden, made a promise to organizer and activist Ady Barkan, a man who is paralyzed by ALS. I want to remind you what that promise was.
The World Health Organization is leading an unprecedented global effort to promote international cooperation in the search for COVID-19 treatments and vaccines. But Donald Trump has refused to join that effort, cutting America off from the rest of the world. If the US discovers a vaccine first, will you commit to sharing that technology with other countries? And will you ensure there are no patents to stand in the way of other countries and companies mass producing those life-saving vaccines?
Absolutely, positively. This is the only humane thing in the world to do. Were I president now, and I propose we do it now, set aside $25 billion to put together a plan now, this instant, how we will distribute that vaccine when it's made available, to guarantee it gets to every American and access is made available to the rest of the world. This guy's whole idea of America on its own is meant America alone. We're out there by ourselves. What's he doing? It lacks any human dignity, what we're doing. So the answer is yes, 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 yes. And it's not only a good thing to do, it's overwhelmingly in our interest to do it as well. Overwhelmingly.
Thank you for that commitment.
What the hell happened to that Joe Biden? Absolutely, positively. That was his response to the question of, will you ensure that these patents don't get in the way of sharing the vaccine globally? Well, he clearly has broken his promise. I've covered this issue now countless times. I view it as the most important issue, right up there with the climate crisis, because if you allow COVID-19 to continue mutating in these countries where the vaccines are not being widely shared, then you will eventually get to the point where COVID-19 will mutate so in such a powerful way that it will render the current vaccines ineffective. I've covered this a number of times. Experts have warned this around the globe. They've come together to say we need to ensure that the patents on these vaccines are lifted so that these vaccines can be mass produced globally and that we stop the growth of COVID-19 before a new variant comes up that renders the current vaccines ineffective. I'll tell you in a minute why Joe Biden is currently against this. Of course, it has a lot to do with the power of Big Pharma and the Chamber of Commerce, but there's also personal ties that Joe Biden has that I'll get to in a second here with a clip from Democracy Now! But first, I want to show you Ady Barkan called this out on Twitter saying, quote, absolutely positively, if President Biden wants Americans to believe him ever, he must keep his ironclad promise, no hedging, no delays, hashtag free the vaccine. So before I get to the clip I want to share, just from Reuters here to give you an idea of the current situation, the U.S. and a handful of other big countries have blocked negotiations at the World Trade Organization involving a proposal spearheaded by India and South Africa that now has the support of 100 WTO members. The proposal would temporarily waive the intellectual property rights of pharmaceutical companies to allow developing countries to produce vaccines. Proponents are pushing Washington to change course ahead of the next formal WTO meeting on the issue on May 5th. So there's a meeting on this issue tomorrow. We're going to see if the U.S. has changed their tune along with Canada, the U.K., and other wealthy countries that so far are not in favor of waiving this the TRIPS agreement, which is the IP protection on these vaccines. Now, let me show you, as I discussed in other videos and just recently, just now in this video, I mentioned how, of course, corporate America, Big Pharma, is in the way of waiving these IP rights. But there's more to it than just that. So Li Feng was on Democracy Now! With Amy Goodman, and they broke down some of the connections that Joe Biden has to Big Pharma.
Can you talk about your reporting on the Biden administration's ties to the vaccine makers? You've got White House advisor Anita Dunn, co-founder of the consulting firm SKDK, which works closely with Pfizer. Biden's domestic policy advisor Susan Rice holds up to $5 million in Johnson & Johnson. White House science advisor Eric Lander holds up to $1 million in shares of BioNTech, which co-developed Pfizer's coronavirus vaccine. Then there's the All Bright group that many in Biden's inner circle come from. and who she and that group represents.
That's right. You know, the pharmaceutical industry is one of the biggest spenders on lobbying in Washington, and there are many conflicts of interest throughout the Biden administration. You just named several of them. On the fact that the number 34 undersecretaries of the State Department were at a consulting firm, Albright Stonebridge Group, that represented Pfizer. That Anita Dunn, you know, she's not someone who's mentioned a lot in the media recently, but she's one of the closest advisors to the Biden administration. She was the de facto campaign manager for his presidential campaign. Her consulting firm represents Pfizer, engages in a lot of the PR and advertising for that firm. These are serious conflicts of interest, and you know they deserve some scrutiny given the fact that Pfizer is looking at this product, this vaccine, as its massive moneymaker. One estimate shows that Pfizer's coronavirus vaccine, under even the kind of negotiated prices that are deeply discounted this year for U.S. consumers, that will bring in something like $15 billion a year, making it one of the highest grossing pharmaceutical products of all time. And they're already talking about raising prices. So Pfizer, Moderna, Johnson & Johnson, they have so much money at stake. They're leaning on lobbyists. They're leaning on former Democratic aides and on potentially some of these folks who they have ties with in the White House.
So, of course, it all comes back to money. Not only do you have Big Pharma, Chamber of Commerce, even Hollywood now, against waiving the IP rights on these vaccines. Hollywood is against it, by the way, because they're afraid that waiving the IP rights on these vaccines will somehow come back to hurt them and patents they have, which is just ridiculous. But you have these groups, in addition to having people within Biden's White House that are advising him. These people, several of them have actual direct financial connections to Big Pharma, pushing them to, of course, want to protect the patents on these vaccines over doing what is necessary for the entire world and lifting these IP rights. It is an absolutely disgusting position. Joe Biden himself, he understood that at the time. In July, he understood the need to waive the patent protection on vaccines to ensure that everybody is vaccinated. But now, of course, surrounded by these conflicts of interest, he has taken a whole different position. We're going to see if maybe something changes tomorrow, May 5th, and on the discussions at the WTO around this, but all signs point to nothing changing. You have, of course, Canada as well, the UK and others, wealthy countries that are receiving all the vaccines, doing the bidding of Big Pharma to protect the patent rights while really not caring that this is going to ultimately not even hurt the entire, other countries, but also come back to bite them when you have eventual mutations of COVID-19 that will render the current vaccines ineffective. So I will link to that video, that discussion as well below. They have a great discussion, Li Feng and Amy Goodman on this issue as well. So check that out. But this is something that I'm going to continue keeping an eye on because I see it right now as the biggest issue up there with the climate crisis.